Hello, my name is Omar Sanchez of the Proctor Oral History Program. Today's date is March 24th, 2020. I'm here with Dr. Paul Ortiz, the director of the Proctor Oral History Program. Thank you for being here with me today.
All right. Well, thank you. It's an honor to be able to talk to you about my favorite topic of the day, African American Studies.
um, so I guess I want to start with, how did African American Studies become a thing at the University of Florida?
Well, every time you ask a historian a question, you run the risk of getting at least 100-year advance prehistory. But as I think you know, African American Studies has a long and venerable history, not only in the United States, but really in the Americas and actually throughout the globe. In the 60s, there's an upsurge of demand among high school students and college students, but I want to focus for a minute on high school students in particular, because in states like California and New York and Texas, and even Florida, high school students began walking out, protesting, organizing, talking to teachers, talking to principals, talking to their parents, and demanding that schools begin to implement or incorporate African American studies writ large. And what I mean by that is, as you know, I'm a historian, and so I usually work in the field of history. But African American Studies, of course, is much broader. It's interdisciplinary. It's English, it's anthropology, it's geography, it's underwater archaeology. One of our former alums from the Proctor program, Justin Donovan, for example, works within African American Studies traditions, but he's an underwater archaeologist. And Justin actually helps to do research on slave ships that were sunk in the 17th, 18th centuries in the Atlantic Ocean. And so what he does is part of African American Studies. But getting back to the 60s, so there's this incredible upsurge among students. And I really want to highlight that because the upsurge in the demand did not come from academics per se originally. It didn't come from people like me. It didn't come from professors. It certainly did not come from administrators. It really came from people like you, your predecessors in the classroom in the 60s and 70s. At the University of Florida, it was really no different. We had a lot of protests in area high schools demanding African American history, in particular, be incorporated into the curriculum. At UF proper, we had a number of student insurgencies, one of them called Black Thursday. Another series of Black-led student insurgencies led to the creation of the Institute of Black Studies. And also, as we learned again at the African American Studies Symposium, that it was that student protest energy coming out of the civil rights movement, especially coming out of the anti-war movement, coming out of the women's movement, coming out of the Chicano movement, and all these movements, which really crystallized on our campus here at UF and led to the formation of African American Studies. But again, what's interesting is it's not a top-down thing. In other words, it's not something that's implemented by a professional academic association nationally. It's not something that's implemented by administration. It's really a demand from the grassroots, from not only students, but also people in the community. And I think you saw at our African American Studies Symposium, the reason we had a community panel was we wanted to remind everyone that African American Studies has always had a root in community struggles for empowerment, for justice. Like, I was trained by incredible intellectuals. I mean, personally, one-on-one, by people like Angela Davis, people like Carlos Munoz, who founded ethnic studies at UC Berkeley. One of my mentors was Cedric Robinson, who founded African American Studies at UC Santa Barbara. These are these legendary figures, but they all told me, they told us, of the younger generation, look, you're not doing Black studies, you're not doing Chicano or Latino or women's studies unless you're working as much in the community writ large as you are on the campus. So in other words, in the 60s and 70s, when you said African American Studies at the University of Florida, what you meant was students doing community workshops in jails, in women's centers, in places off campus, and bringing that knowledge that they learned off campus onto campus. In other words, we were trying to break out of 5+ centuries of missionary propaganda, which in our communities has always meant that educated people from Spain or from Italy or from England come out and uplift us. And unfortunately, too many of us have incorporated that same ideology. It's what I call a missionary ideology. African American studies broke that cycle of dependency and humiliation, because what we said in doing it, people like again Angela Davis, Cedric Robinson, and a younger generation of people like say Bill Hooks, Ibram Kendi, is to say that we have as much knowledge in our communities, in our people's histories, in our ancestors. We have as much knowledge there as we do, or as academics do in their archives at Harvard or Yale or Princeton and so on and so forth. And that's really a revolutionary insight. And that's one of the reasons why oral history plays such a big role in African American studies.
I want to touch back on something you said earlier about learning African American studies in high schools. What's the importance of for students to learn African American studies in high school, and then later, and as a follow-up question, in college?
It's more important than ever. You can see it right now in the crisis we're in right now, the coronavirus pandemic. There is so much ignorance today about how people get along, about how people interact. There's a lot of ignorance that's being promoted by highly educated people, for example, about Chinese people as somehow being responsible for the virus. African American studies is so important because good African American studies teaches us from the very beginning about the intersections between the African diaspora, the Chinese diaspora, the Japanese diaspora. For example, in 1905, a lot of African American people in the United States, when Japan went to war against Russia, most of America supported Russia. Why? I guess because Americans think Russians are white people. I don't know. But I can tell you most African Americans supported Japan in 1905. And a lot of African Americans supported the Chinese Revolution in the 1940s. And you'll see even to this day that in China, Black studies is a growing discipline. If I had the time, I've been offered to teach in China and Japan almost every year of my career for the past 15 years, because in those countries, African American studies is highly valued. Now, if we in the United States taught African American studies in that way, in other words, we taught about the fact that China, for example, offered sanctuary to Robert F. Williams, who was a former NAACP organizer who had to leave his country because he was being hounded by the FBI. So first he found sanctuary, I'm talking now in the 60s. First he found, because he was involved in a number of shootouts against the Ku Klux Klan, and he advocated armed self-defense. He had to flee the United States, talking about Robert F. Williams. First he's in Cuba for a while, and he actually broadcasts a program called Radio Free Cuba or Radio Free Havana, one or the other. This is a Black man broadcasting a program from Havana to Miami. And you can imagine how infuriated people in South Florida about this program. But after a while, he ended up going to China. And again, many other Black intellectual figures like W.E.B. Du Bois wrote often about China and trying to get people to understand the intersections between Black history and Asian history. And I just to kind of get back to your question, Omar, ethnic studies, this is done in this way, to me is a requirement. It's really a matter of life or death, because right now we're seeing a lot of misinformation about the virus. We're seeing a lot of anti-Chinese, a lot of anti-Asian racism. And see, if people had a grounding in African American studies, they would be able to get along with people throughout the world in a much better, more effective way than we are right now.
Yeah, so there's something interesting you said earlier was about educating the community, because I think most people think of like educating high school and college students and then hoping the next generation will fix the problems. But you talked about educating the community now too. Like, what do you think about the importance of educating the community about ethnic studies?
Well, I think it's a reciprocal activity. And if you think of the Black Panther Party in the late 60s and early 70s, you think about like the free breakfast program. Like last year, the oral history program sponsored three-day African American History Symposium. Our keynote speaker was Professor Curtis Austin from University of Oregon. He talked about the free breakfast program as a great example of how the Black Panther Party understood the importance of, nutrition. Kids can't learn unless they are fed, unless they have a healthy breakfast, a healthy start to the day. Now that knowledge was developed, again, not in academia. It was developed out in the community, in these struggles that the Black Panthers were a part of. Now, after that, a lot of people involved in the Black Panther Party became academics, especially women, and they became tenured professors at state colleges, and especially state colleges in California, and primarily states out west, but a few in the east as well. So that's an example of how community learning plays a big role in African American studies. You think about someone like Terry Thomas, the great Puerto Rican liberation writer, and much of his work is about challenging the so-called racial boundaries between Black and Latino people, especially Afro-Puerto Ricans, because he was an Afro-Puerto Rican. But again, much of his poetry and literature was frankly, was written in prison, because Down These Mean Streets, which I use in my African American Latino Histories class, Down These Mean Streets is a prison memoir in the tradition of autobiography of Malcolm X, Frederick Douglass's autobiography, many kind of slave or ex-slave autobiographies. And again, a lot of the knowledge comes out of what people learn in places like picket lines. The Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee is another great example. In the early 60s, people like Gwendolyn Zoharah Simmons were leaders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in the Mississippi Delta areas. And they took what they learned as community organizers in the civil rights movement, in the Black Power movement, and really took that knowledge and brought it into academia. Without people like Vincent Harding or Zoharah Simmons or Angela Davis, there would be no Black studies, or Black studies would be very much like any other discipline, right? It may have its professional associations, it may have its journals, but it would lack the activist and community-based centers of the discipline. And again, I just want to emphasize that in this way, the learning, the knowledge that we generate in African American studies is similar to what we teach everyone in oral history. That is, in oral history, we teach that knowledge is generated not from the top down, again, not in that missionary way we're used to learning, or the educators call this the banking theory of education, right? This was something Paulo Freire and other Brazilian, but also African American educators in the 60s were trying to fight against. This idea of the banking education model was, you take knowledge off of my bookshelf, and I have a lot of books, I have thousands of books. So the idea would be, I just try to put that knowledge into your head as a student. That's the banking knowledge, or the banking theory of knowledge. The struggle-centered theory of knowledge, which Black studies comes out of that tradition, is again this idea that the knowledge that your ancestors have, your parents, you may have an uncle who was in a social movement, or maybe not. Maybe your uncle was a businessman his whole life, or maybe he was a farm worker. The idea in African American studies is that he has as much to teach us as anyone else that we can possibly learn from. So I gravitated towards African American studies almost instinctively, because my father had to drop out of school in the 7th grade to help support his family. Most Hispanic men of his generation had to do that in Texas. My mom worked in donut shops before she passed away when I was a freshman in high school. And so we were working class people. So what would it say about me as a person if I said, well, I don't have anything to learn from my parents? That would be dishonoring my own heritage. And that's the reason I think that African American studies and Chicano Latino studies have the orientation, the kind of orientation the way they do. And finally, and this is going to sound like a value judgment, but I just can't avoid it. We have to understand as people of color that more often than not, up to this point, academia has harmed us more than it has actually helped us. It has harmed us. What I mean by this is that if you look in a field I'm very familiar with, agriculture, public universities have received trillions of dollars from the federal government to create more efficient ways of agriculture. You know, I say efficient, I'm using air quotes because it's not really true. But they've supported agribusiness for over a century through land-grant colleges. I'm talking about public universities like University of Florida, like UC Berkeley, like University of Texas. None of them are innocent. Those resources have went to support agribusiness and large growers. Those resources are public. Everyone is taxed on those, whether you're documented or undocumented. How much of those resources have actually gone to help farm workers, whether they were Filipino farm workers, Black farm workers, Mexican farm workers, Puerto Ricans, so on and so forth. In fact, the founder of the department that I taught in, at UC Santa Cruz, Bill Friedland, founder of the Department of Community Studies in the late 60s at UC Santa Cruz, Dr. Friedland sued the University of California. And the basis of the lawsuit was that the charter of the University of California says that UC is supposed to support people in the entire state, not just big agribusiness, which is what it was doing. But to kind of cycle back to your question, this is why I make that the claim that academia has traditionally been used as worked against us, like us. And so one of the things that African American Studies is trying to do is to try to equalize education, to try to equalize both our understanding of where learning and knowledge comes from, but also to try to get us to rethink the idea about who should be benefiting from what we do at places like the University of Florida. And I was very excited at the African American Studies Symposium. That question came up over and over and over again. Omar, it suffused the entire day. What should this discipline, African American Studies, be doing for the community? What role does the community have in this discipline? You will not see that in any other disciplinary discussion, I swear to you. The only other places I've seen it in are in like really grounded Chicano studies program discussions, some women's studies program discussions, but in general, academics are so arrogant that we think that whatever field we're in somehow is automatically contributing to the good of humanity. That may or may not be true. But see, in African American Studies, we problematize that question. We trouble the waters with that question constantly, and we try to kind of evaluate our discipline based on that criteria. Like, what are we doing?
I think the next question I want to ask is, how do you think ethnic studies is developing at the University of Florida? Because, like, yes, we have an African American program, but I don't see like a Latinx program or anything at this point. So, what do you think how do you think ethnic studies is doing at UF?
Well, we've had some very positive things. You know, again, we have the Symposium, the African American Studies, the 50th anniversary, which was incredibly positive. We had a great student insurgency on campus a couple of summers ago, which pushed the university to reopen or rebuild the Institute of Black Culture and La Casita, or the Institute of Hispanic Latino Cultures. So there have been some really positive things to talk about. We have a larger number of courses in Latino studies than we've ever had before. Now, the flip side of that, however, is that we don't have an African American Studies department. That's a deficit. That's got to change. To me, that's priority number one. And as you know, a big part of the symposium, which I chaired, was to try to help continue to build that momentum. Because a lot of students, a lot of staff, a lot of faculty have worked so hard over the past 50 years to develop African American Studies at UF. And we still don't have a department. So I'm hoping within my lifetime that's going to change. I'm being sarcastic there. I think it's going to change. I'm hoping in about, say, 3 to 5 years. We're in the process of trying to hire a new director, a permanent director of African American Studies, and his or her first charge, by the way, is to transition the program into department where we can begin to award master's degrees in African American Studies, PhDs in African American Studies. And then the next step in my mind is to create a Latinx or Latino Studies center or institute, and think about developing an undergraduate degree in Latino Studies or Hispanic Studies. I mean, hey, look, we're in Florida. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But to me, the most important thing isn't what it's called. It's the knowledge that takes place in that seminar. So if you're taking a course from Efrain Barradas or Nick Vargas or myself or Sana Resende on any of these topics, to me, that's kind of what matters more than necessarily nomenclature. But yeah, we're lagging behind, to be honest with you. When I go to UC Berkeley, there's a College of Ethnic Studies. When I go to San Francisco State, College of Ethnic Studies. When I go to Hunter College in New York, there's a Center for Puerto Rican Studies, and I mean, I could kind of go on and on, hopefully not sounding too churlish, but basically UF is in a catch-up game. Ethnic studies on this campus right now, and again, it's kind of, there's positives and negatives. We have wonderful people who are teaching things like Native American studies, Asian American studies, African American studies. But right now, there's not enough. What's the term? We don't have enough clout. We don't have departments. We don't have a college, and that's ultimately, I think, what we need.
So you mentioned that you were the chair of the African American Symposium. Can you talk about the development of the symposium and like what was going on like behind the scenes and all that?
You want the long version or the gossipy version or the short version? I can, or all of the above. Well, first of all, it was a real honor to be asked to chair the symposium, and I was approached. I think the last week of summer C, before classes started in the fall. And I was asked if I could organize a national African American Studies symposium. And this was based on the amazing work that the Proctor program did the previous year, academic year, in organizing our African American History Symposium, which, by the way, was the biggest African American history symposium or event in the history of the University of Florida. It was really an incredible endeavor. So I was asked by the college and by James Asegdi, who's the interim chair of African American Studies, to chair the symposium committee. But originally the idea was, hey, let's have a big national symposium. And I said, well, when are you all proposing to do this? And the first response was, well, can we do it later in the fall? I said, absolutely not. To do a national symposium, you need at least, it took me 2 full years to organize the African American History Symposium, which opened the door of the Cannon Collection. And as you know, that took a heck of a lot of work from a lot of different people. And so the second, and now I'm going to tell you kind of behind the scenes story. I was asked then, could you pull it off by February of 2020? And so again, remember, this is like the waning days of August 2019. I said, okay, well, let me talk to a few people nationally, and I'll get back with you. And because the first thing you have to do with a symposium, I took my community support for granted because there's some wonderful go-to people, and I would be remiss if I didn't talk about incredible people like, say, Vivian Tyler, Sherry Dupree, Stan Richardson, Carol Richardson. Albert White, Lauren Wright. I knew people were going to backstop us, locally. So I tried to look nationally for people who could either keynote the symposium or people who could like lead panels and have some, in other words, some big names of the field. And what I found out very quickly was we just didn't have enough time to do a national symposium, because one of the things was the keynote speaker who I had in mind. I won't call her name out now, but we're old friends. She would have been an incredible keynote speaker. She chairs one of the marquee Black Studies programs in the United States, but she just received the MacArthur Genius Award. Just got in September, actually, like right when we were just beginning to plan the symposium. So naturally, her honorarium was going to be substantial. And we could have paid for that, but it would have taken a lot of time, additional time in fundraising. And her schedule was booked up. And when you're trying to plan a symposium like this, you have to be cognizant of the fact that the people you're going to ask to do keynotes or chair panels, oftentimes their schedules are booked out a year in advance. Angela Davis's schedule is booked out 3 years in advance. My schedule is booked out a year and a half in advance. Like, you asked me now to give a talk in the fall of 2020, I'm like, no, I can't do it. Let's talk the spring or the fall of 2021 or 22. So to make a long story short, I just decided, hey, look, y'all, we can't do a national symposium and pull it off by February 2020. And so what we did was the next best thing. We decided, let's do a symposium which focuses on UF, the 50th anniversary, that we call alumni back, but we're not going to necessarily try to do a big national symposium. And we're going to give ourselves a couple years to organize that national symposium. So I think we're still going to do that national symposium, but what you saw in February was no less important. And from the beginning, Omar, what I was charged to do and what I charged my committee with, and I have to say it was a stellar committee. Now, you're talking about Kenneth Nunn, who's a senior professor in the Lebanon Law School. You're talking about Jake Gordon, who's the founder of African American Studies at the University of Kansas. You're talking about Manushka Celeste, a brilliant a scholar in comparative Black diaspora studies. James Segedy was ex officio member of the committee. James is interim chair of African American Studies, just a wonderful colleague to work with. You're talking about people like Tricia Hilliard-Nunn, who is our liaison. And so it was like a dream team. It was so incredibly wonderful to work with these great scholars and friends. And we really had three themes that we wanted to highlight in the symposium. One, we wanted to talk about the history of African American Studies here at the University of Florida. Two, we wanted to emphasize what makes African American Studies unique, which again gets back to the connection between community and campus, how learning is dialogical and reciprocal between community and campus, and how African American Studies has always been concerned with what's happening in the community in terms of, again, economic empowerment, women's rights, the role that you have students play in Gainesville, for example. Now, and then the third thing was to really get a dialogue going about where we want to go next. Because, 50 years, so what? We unveiled a great plaque, a great marker. It's a great moment in time. We archived the video from the symposium. As a historian, I love that. That's like the stuff I work with. But what does it mean? What is, kind of going forward, what does African American Studies mean for the next 50 years? And so we try to reflect that, Omar, in the panel. So panel number one, at the beginning of the day, was a panel on kind of the academic side. That is, what does African American Studies bring to the table in terms of academics, the intellectual insights, the archival materials, so on and so forth. Panel two was the community. That's right. Was it the community panel? I think it was the community panel. That's right. And so the community panel was designed to, again, if you think of people like Vivian Filer was a key person on that panel, Omar, because I can't tell you how many of our students at UF have went to Vivian Filer for help on their senior thesis projects, on their seminar papers. She's this incredible leader, the civil rights movement here, going back to the early 60s, but also a person who our students have worked with generation after generation after generation in terms of learning about Black history. She reopened the Cotton Club. Now it's a wonderful museum. And then people like Sherry Dupree, another person who was on that community panel. She's a retired librarian at Santa Fe College, a person who's introduced so many of my students to the story of the Rosewood Massacre in Levy County, who has taken so many of my students and our students under her wing, as long as I've been here and even before that. And so we wanted to emphasize to people the role that community played. the interactions between UF and the larger community. And again, not just that UF students and professors go and teach people in the community, but people like Vivian Filer and Sherry Dupree come and teach us. So the third panel really got to the core of that. Where do we go from here? Where does African American Studies go from here? And that panel was a student alumni panel that was chaired by Dr. Vincent Adejumo. And the idea behind the panel was that by listening to the insights of alumni, former students in African American Studies, and current students in African American Studies, we would get a sense for how African American Studies has impacted students over the generations, how it's impacted their intellectual development. And I think if you saw the celebration the following day, there were even more alumni of the program who came back to celebrate with us the 50th anniversary. These people became labor organizers, judges, doctors, teachers, social workers. So, but getting a sense for the impact of Black studies in the past 50 years helps us think about, okay, well, this is what we've done right. We made a big impact on people's lives. But then the current students and the alumni on that panel, if you watch the panel, it's a wonderful panel, by the way, they all talk more or less about where they want to see African American Studies go next. And to me, that's just as important as kind of where we come from and kind of where we are now. Because, as you know, that old biblical phrase, without vision, people perish.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a next question. Because I think you've answered most of my questions. Because I was going to ask next, what's the importance of African American Studies at University of Florida? But I feel like you've answered that, unless you want to go more into detail.
Well, I mean, I'll just say that I talked to a lot of people at UF who I feel that could really use an African American Studies course. And now I'm talking about faculty, administrators, students. I would love to have the time to go back and take a course with Nisha Celeste or Vince Adejumo myself. There's always things we can learn. My frustration at the University of Florida has been the understanding of the importance of African American Studies here is very, very uneven. There's some faculty, there's some administrators, there's some students who understand how important Black Studies is. But then there are others who think it's like some kind of extra thing, like some kind of elective thing. And my mission is to try to convince them otherwise. But that, I only have so many hours in a day. Another frustration I have is that I've talked to so many students who would be African American Studies majors if we only had more course offerings, if we only had more faculty. And what's equally frustrating to me, Omar, is I've talked to so many prospective grad students. I've had prospective grad students in my office at Pugh Hall telling me, I want to do a dissertation on some aspect of Black history or Black culture in Florida, but why don't you have a Black Studies PhD program? And why are there so few African American faculty at the University of Florida? It's an equally critical issue. And so I'll give you one example. So I had a prospective grad student who visited with me 3 years ago. She really wanted to come to UF. I was gonna chair her dissertation committee. But number one, there wasn't an African American Studies PhD program. The other thing was she wanted to be able to to have on her committee more Black faculty. And there's just not enough here at UF. And so she ended up, instead of going to UF, she ended up getting a full fellowship to go to Rutgers University, which is one of our peer universities. And I'm on her dissertation committee, but now I'm an outside member on her dissertation committee. And her topic is a Florida topic. So she actually has to travel to Florida from New Jersey to do her research, when all along she could have been here and not have had to travel that much to do her research. If only UF would have had a fully functional African American Studies department, if only we would have had more Black faculty, if only we had paid more attention to this field over the past 50 years. So, I mean, our work is not done. I mean, look, I come to campus every day and I feel like I'm putting on my armor. And a lot of other faculty will tell you the same thing. We start from a position, we're way out in the margins in many ways, in the sense that we have, and I teach my grad students the same lesson. And you probably have heard me say this at SAAHP even, it's that when you do African American studies and you go into these fields like Black studies, like Chicano studies, you're going to have to work harder than your white peers. You're going to have to advise more student organizations. You're going to have to be there for the students when they have a march or a picket. So let me tell you a story about the celebration. The African American Studies celebration for the 50th anniversary happened the day after the symposium, right? So I was supposed to attend the celebration. That included the unveiling of the marker, the 50th anniversary marker, commemorating 50 years of African American Studies at UF. It's now our newest marker, newest historical marker on campus. Midway through the ceremony, I had to run over to Tiger Hall because I was asked to speak at a protest in favor of workers' rights on campus. And so I ran over, did my little bullhorn speech, I gave props to the students who organized such a great event in the middle of February, and then ran back to continue to participate in the African American Studies celebration. The next day, in the Alligator, the student newspaper, there was an article about the protest. There was an article about the symposium, and in the article about the pro-workers protest, the students have organized, there was a picture of me with the bullhorn. And a senior administrator said to me, well, Ortiz, I saw you at the celebration. How could you have been in front of Tiger Hall to protest? It's almost as if you're in two places at the same time. And I just kind of smiled at the administrator and said, well, we Mexican American people can be mandated. That's our tradition. Magical realism. And so I guess I was in two places at one time. I think I kind of freaked the poor guy out. But anyway, that's just kind of an anecdote. That's what we do as Black Studies, faculty, is we have to be in more than one place at one time. We have to do the impossible because we don't have the level of resources that our colleagues in other departments and programs have. I mean, look, when I lecture at places like Northwestern or Berkeley or Harvard, and the past year, and I've told colleagues there how many majors we have in African American Studies, that we have over 110 majors. And my colleagues will say, well, how many core faculty do you have? And I'll say, well, never more than 3 or 4 at a time. And these colleagues at places like, UCLA are like, there's no way. You can't have 110 majors in African American Studies with so few core faculty and a program taught mainly by affiliates and lecturers. How can that possibly be, Paul? Paul, you got to be making this up. And so I give him the phone number of the office manager for African American Studies. I said, if you don't believe me, talk to the office manager. She'll tell you the exact same thing, which is all by way of saying that we specialize in the impossible in African American Studies.
Sure, but I do want to say though, isn't that kind of a lot of pressure on, I guess, professors of color because they have to do more than they should? Because you accept that responsibility.
Well, yeah, you do. Look, you're just wore out. I mean, yes, we do more than we should. We do a lot of phone calls to each other, colleagues from other campuses. I mean, I flipped in my career now because early in my career, when I was a junior professor, I would talk to people like Angela Davis and Jeff Robinson, and they would commiserate, but then they would say, look, again, almost kind of like too much that has been, how's the phrase, much has been given much, as much as required, And one of the things I remember Cedric Robinson in particular would say, and I was able to say this to Cedric before he passed away. Cedric was a giant, and he was the author of Black Marxism, a book which entirely changed the field in the early 80s. And as I mentioned earlier, Cedric Robinson was the founder of Black Studies at UC Santa Barbara. And in 2014, we organized a conference in his honor. Angela Davis keynoted, Ruthie Gilmore, Christine Heatherton, Tina, I mean, Jordan Camp. I mean, it was one of the most incredible intellectual gatherings I've ever been a part of. But one of the things that Cedric would tell us, and I learned over the years that generations of junior faculty would call Cedric Robinson whenever we got into like a rough patch, whenever we felt like overwhelmed, whenever we felt overburdened. And I remember one time I called Cedric because I'd been accused of reverse racism by a number of white colleagues. And again, this is a typical kind of experience, the fact that color face in higher ed. And I can't remember if I was still at Santa Cruz or if I was at UF by that point. But Cedric listened, very patiently. He was always this incredibly patient and soft-spoken person. But then, he said very softly, he said, well, Paul, you are looking for love in all the wrong places, brother. And he just kind of reminded me, he said, you will never get any kind of recognition for the work you're doing that's meaningful from either your colleagues, your white colleagues, or your administrators. He said the love that you create is any love that you experience in the academy is love that you create. And he said, my generation created a certain space for your generation. It wasn't big enough, it wasn't robust enough, but it was a space nonetheless that we fought for 30 plus years. Cedric fought for actually 40 plus years. And now it's your job to kind of carry on. And he said, all I can tell you is that, again, don't look for props or recognition from the mainstream of academia. He said, you're going to have to fight for every little space that you can create for your students, as precious space. Guard it as well as you can, and try to pass it on. And, years later, I learned that Cedric gave the same exact talk to, literally hundreds of younger faculty of color, because, we would all commiserate with each other at a certain point. I mean, right now, I'm on 21 dissertation committees just at the University of Florida. When I tell people that number, especially white peers, they're like, no, that's impossible. That can't be, I'm like, ask my dean. My dean can tell you. And the reason I get on those committees is that ethnic studies, and this kind of cycles back to the original question, Omar, ethnic studies, so many students now want to learn about the history of Black people, of brown people, of Asian people, of African people. And they want to learn how we all have gotten along or not gotten along or interacted. They want to learn about parallel cultures, intersecting cultures, intersectionality, inclusivity, all these things. But our universities haven't caught up to that fact. And so they will hire, 10 people in a department who may be on 1 or 2 dissertation committees per year, if that. And then they have a minority of us who are on, 10, 15, 20 dissertation committees. And are we looking for recognition from the university? No, we're not. We do need, a little space sometimes. But it's something, I would watch. Look, I had the first 2 dissertation committees I was on at UC Santa Cruz. The chair of the committee was Angela Davis. And so I was able to learn so much from Angela. And when I told you the story earlier about being at 2 places at one time, I learned that from Angela, because I would be in a dissertation committee with her or on an academic committee, and then I'd be asked to speak at a rally or a panel on, opposing the death penalty. And there Angela would be there as well, and I will never just forget the first time I was ever on a panel with Angela. And then the first time I was spoke at the same rally as Angela Davis. You talk about imposter syndrome, man. I was like, what in the hell am I doing here? I'm going to make a fool of myself. I'm supposed to speak in the same podium as Angela Davis. You got to be kidding me. My father, by the way, is an enormous fan of Angela. He loves Angela Davis. He's like, I can't tell you how much, he just turned 81. And so here I am. This would have been the fall of 2001. You can check me on this because there were two high-profile death penalty cases in California. One was Stanley Fitzgerald Williams. The other was the person I can't remember. And so I ended up speaking at a panel with Angela. And as soon as I found out she was speaking on the panel, I was like, what in the hell? I mean, I can't, why would you ask me to speak in the same panel as this intellectual giant? I mean, what could I possibly offer after Angela Davis spoke? I mean, luckily, I spoke before her. She was obviously always a keynote speaker wherever she was. But you know what she did? And she did the same thing with me that she did with any junior faculty colleague, is she took me aside before that panel and she said, Paul, I want to tell you how honored I am to be in this panel with you. And I mean, I just teared up, man. I didn't know what to say. I was so blown away that she was so incredibly gracious to put me at ease and to say, hey, we're comrades. You know, don't worry about, you know, what happened in the 60s or whatever. Like, we're comrades in this struggle to try to help get this man off of death row. That's what matters, man. Titles don't matter. The history doesn't matter. All that matters is that you and I are working in a common capacity, a common enterprise, a common struggle to get Stanley Fitzgerald Williams off death row. The other occasion I have Angela Davis, which just blew me away, was many, actually quite a few, but just one more I'll share with you because I know we have limited time. But when I first arrived at Santa Cruz as a junior faculty member, the university there does a really good job of kind of welcoming junior faculty into the intellectual community at Santa Cruz. And you're required to give a lecture on your research within, I think, the first quarter that you arrive here. And so it's a campus-wide lecture. You know, it's kind of scary, but it's really a big deal. It's kind of a rite of passage for junior faculty. Or if you're looking a little more cynically, you could say it's a hazing ritual, you know, for the junior faculty. So I get up there to give my talk, my first talk on campus, brand new PhD. And I get up, you know, I take my notes out and whatever I have on the podium, I look at who's sitting in the front row. Angela Davis. And who's sitting next to Angela Davis? Bettina Aftiger, an equally legendary activist scholar. Bettina and Angela were dear friends at Santa Cruz. And Angela was one of the first persons to ask me a question during Q&A. But what she taught me was, and the kind of behavior she taught me to model was, it doesn't matter how big you do, because Angela, by 2001, was an intellectual giant. But she took time out of her schedule to come and listen to my talk. And it made me feel like so good inside that Angela would do that. And Omar, I could tell you, I'll tell you one more story of Angela Davis, just because I love telling Angela Davis stories. So we were on a panel together in, it must have been around the time of the 2004 presidential election. And the topic was, I think the topic was something like the possibility of organizing third party, because a lot of people in 2004, a lot of progressives and radicals were very dissatisfied with the Democratic Party. Okay, nothing's changed, right? So I was on a panel, and I was on a panel with Angela. It may have been just the two of us in the panel together. There may have been one other person. The chair of one of the chairs of the Green Party somewhere in it wasn't in Santa Cruz, maybe the chair of the Green Party in San Francisco or Oakland or something, had come down. There are a lot of Green Party people there because in California the Green Party is a big deal. It's a big party. But one of those chairs during Q&A got up and was supposed to ask a question. But as you know, at academic panels, a lot of times the people who are supposed to ask questions end up giving a lecture, right? So this person got up to ask Angela a question, and she directed the question to Dr. Davis. And the question was something like this: Angela, I'm very confused. As the chair of the Green Party in my city, And as a white person, I don't understand why black people um, continue to support the Democratic Party. It is opposed to their interests at every level. Uh, it denigrates them. And the Green Party, on the other hand, works on behalf of all black people. And so why on earth wouldn't black people all be members of the Green Party? Now, if you break that question down, it's incredibly condescending. The subtext of that question is, oh, wow, these people must be so stupid. They don't understand their own self-interest. And so if I would have responded to that question, I mean, I was angry by the time this person finished her disposition on why black people were politically naive. I was ready to like let her have it. I mean, if you'd asked me a question, I would have said like, how dare you, especially like as a white person, tell black people what they should be doing. A lot of black people in the audience, and everyone was kind of holding their breath, right? Here's how Angela Davis answered the question. She said, well, you know, these are really interesting and important topics that you bring up, but I think you should approach this from a different angle. I think you should approach this from what is the Green Party doing that is not allowing it to take advantage of the black radical tradition? Because if that is the black radical tradition, which is the foundation of radicalism and Green Party politics and socialism and left and, you know, progressive and everything. She said it's the black radical tradition. By the way, Cedric Robinson was the person who coined that phrase originally in black Marxism. So Angela's way of answering it was to kind of turn the question on its head, but again, not to call out the person and not to kind of shame the person. I guess in the age of social media now, what's the term we use? Shaming?
Yeah.
Right? Something like that.
Or cancel culture.
Cancel culture, yeah. I mean, Angela was never into that. Angela was into, let's organize for the revolution. Like, if we're serious about a revolution, and Angela at her core is a revolutionary, always has been, always will be. If you want to be a revolutionary, what Angela taught us at that moment was you have to try to always be bringing people in. You can't exclude anyone, even if they're stupid and ignorant. Yeah, sorry for using the phrases. You have to try to educate the brothers and sisters about, you know, what it is they're not quite getting, you know, per se. But I want to emphasize that that's something Angela learned from her parents. I mean, she grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. Her parents, her father had to lead self-defense patrol in their neighborhood because the Klan was targeting the Davis family and black middle class people in Birmingham. They were being targeted for violence. So Angela grew up in very much an organizer's milieu, you know, with her parents. I mean, I saw her mother speak on one occasion when I was in grad school. It was incredible. I mean, I'm like, wow, now I understand kind of the tradition that Angela Davis comes from. But again, those are things as a historian, I just relish to learn those types of things.
I think I want to conclude the interview, but thank you for everything you talked about, and thank you for everything you do for us. I want to say, I think it gave me a lot to reflect on, honestly, about like ethnic studies in general and African American history. Do you have any other like final remarks?
No, I mean, you asked excellent questions, Omar. You know, I think you have a really good understanding of the field, and I just want us I want to encourage everyone to go back and look at the African American Studies Symposium because the panels were just so illuminating. I mean, I especially enjoyed the community and alumni student panels. So, so those were really a lot of fun. So, but thank you. It was a great interview. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I'm going to end the recording.